Mic sync. Hi, my name is David. Now let me explain. I'm going to explain to you the entirety of Norse mythology in this amount of time. It is also going to not detail every single thing about Norse mythology or where it comes from, but I'm going to do my best. So, real quick, we're going to get into mildly boring territory, yet mildly interesting territory. So, Nordic or Norse mythology started around 1190 up until 790 BC, is at least where we were finding all of the fun parts of it, and is mainly found in the Scandinavian culture. Most of the sources that we have found when it comes to Norse mythology or Nordic mythology have actually straight up just been surface level amounts of knowledge. You may think, oh, but we know a lot if we're able to make an entire video game franchise or an entire 4 or 5 movies out of Nordic mythology. Then how can we do this? Well, it's because it's not all exactly how it's supposed to be. Some of it's correct. Some of it is very close to being correct, but not all of it is going to be perfectly correct. The Scandinavians were a very oral society, meaning that they did not write a lot of what they taught down. A lot of how they were teaching was specifically through talking to people and by word of mouth. It was not all textbooks. We did not find a lot of our things by textbooks. It was mainly art and poetry. It was mainly found by the Skaldic and Edda poetry. And all of these Norse poems eventually unraveled a beautiful story that we can tell today. Before we get started with everything we know, I need to tell you a little bit about the society that was surrounding everything. So we won't touch on the specifics too much, but here's some things that you might need to know. There were 2 different groups of gods. There was the Aesir and the Vanir. The Aesir gods are the more well-known gods. You may think Odin, you may think Baldur, Loki, Thor, all of the bigger known gods, the more known gods. And the lesser known gods are of the Vanir franchise. The biggest names when it comes to the Vanir franchise was Freya, Freyr, and Njord. That is about all we need to discuss. Let's get into the world building. In the beginning, there were 3 planes, 3 realms, if you will. There was Niflheim, Muspelheim, and Guningugap. I hope I said that right. I think I did. You know what? I'm confident I did. Guningugap. Now, specifically in this order, from top to bottom, it went Niflheim. Specifically in this order, it went Niflheim, Guningugap, and Muspelheim. Between those 3, Muspelheim was a hot realm of lava and fire. Well, you might think of a Christian hell. That is kind of what Muspelheim was. It was just lava and fire. If you think of the Nether, then that's kind of what Muspelheim was. In a weird poll on how to give an analogy, that's kind of what Muspelheim was. Guningugap was a purgatory, was like a limbo. It was the void. It had nothing to it. And then right above it in Niflheim was just cold, ice, nothingness. It was just a desert of despair, cold, wind, and chill. From these 3 eventually became the first beings. From the fires of Muspelheim eventually came 2 of the beings. The ice of Niflheim slowly started to melt away from the fires of Muspelheim, siring Audhumla and Ymir. The best way I can describe the 2 of these guys, Audhumla was a giant cow, and Ymir was the first giant. And as cows do, they're going to start licking the ice of Niflheim. After Audhumla eventually started to lick the ice of Niflheim, came the first 2 gods. First siring the forefather of the gods, whose name was Buri. Buri, I guess, was just frozen there, eventually gave birth to another god named Bor. Bor eventually got together with Besla. Besla and Bor had the 3 most important gods that started all in here. They had Odin, Vili, and Ve. Those 3 boys done got into a whole heap of trouble. Also, if you're curious, like, oh, Bor and Besla got together and had these 3, how did Buri, have these kids? Well, Buri did something called self-fertilization. And something about armpits. Now, these 3 scamps, Odin, Vili, and Ve, eventually decided, you know what? We're done living in Guningugap. We're taking Ymir down. They used the size of Ymir, unaliving him. And from Ymir came, supposedly, the 9 realms. But how they did it was pretty cool. Pay attention. They created the world from his flesh, the sky from his skull, the mountains from his bones, and the sea from his blood. From the bark of the trees from Midgard came Ask and Embla, the first two regular old humans to be in Midgard. Ask and Embla eventually sired more and more children coming from the bark of the trees and procreating with each other, creating the societies that were around at the time. From then on, life existed, as society would. Just kept on going up until Ragnarok. That is jumping the gun way too quick, though. Let's talk about everything leading up to Ragnarok and the world that was created with Nordic mythology. To start off with some world building, let me tell you about Yggdrasil, the world tree. Yggdrasil is a giant ash tree that held together the 9 realms. These 9 realms included, but are not limited to, Niflheim, the underworld, Midgard, what we might know as Earth today, and Asgard, the realm of the gods, or one of the realm of the gods. The tree is also the source of the new afterlife after the age of Ragnarok. Now there's also life on the tree itself. Let's talk about that real quick. On the tree itself is a nice little squirrel named Ratatotskr. Ratatotskr was a messenger in the world tree and kind of the part of the maintenance when it came to the world tree. Ratatotskr delivered messages between the giant eagles that sat atop of the tree in its nest and sent messages from them to Nidhogg. Nidhogg, also known as Cursestriker, was a giant dragon that sat at the bottom of the tree and ate at its roots, trying to cause devastation to the 9 realms around it. Another patch of life which sat at the roots were the 3 Norns. These 3 fates ended up holding together the roots as Nidhogg ate at them. So Nidhogg did not succeed because it's a 3v1, and you would think a dragon would win, but no. Those 3 Norns held together the fates and the lives of all who were surrounding it in the 9 realms. But surrounding the 9... Speaking of the 9 realms, let's talk about that real quick. Individually, here are all of the realms. There is Asgard, the realm of the Aesir. Alfheim, the realm of the Bright Elves. Jotunheim, the realm of the Giants. Midgard, the humans' realm. That's the best way I can describe Midgard. Muspelheim, the Fire realm. The realm that holds the giant Surtur. Surtur is a fun little guy that we're going to be talking about later. Nidavellir, which was the dwarves' realm. Niflheim, which is the ice realm that we first described earlier. Niflheim, which is the ice realm. Svartalfheim, which is the realm of the dark elves. And Vanaheim, the realm of the Vanir. The original authors and philosophers have sometimes disputed on whether or not these are actually the true realms. There are some Christian elements that have come within these philosophies and the ways that we have interpreted these poets. And by Christian elements, I mean the afterlife. Some of the earlier philosophers and deciphers that first found all of this did not agree with how the afterlife worked and decided that they would name the afterlife hell. Doesn't work. They would combine Nidavellir and Svartalfheim and then replace another realm, because if you combine 2 of them, there's going to be 8. So they thought, oh, let's just make hell one of them. Hell would be the afterlife, which you can see some of the Christian influence that would be interpreted in this way. I'm going to argue this point. I don't believe that this is how it should be interpreted due to the fact of Loki, the god of mischief, his offspring, as well as how Niflheim has been interpreted in this story. Niflheim is supposed to be the afterlife in this story. It's not supposed to be hell, because hell is one of Loki's children. Loki is the brother of Odin. Loki, whose parents were Farbauti and Laufey, not that one. Loki's brothers were Halbindi and Bilester. Sometime later, jumping a little bit ahead in his life, Loki eventually sired a son named Nadi with his wife Sigyn. Loki had multiple other children with Sigyn, but let's talk about when he had a different wife. Loki eventually went off and had another set of children with a giantess named Angerboda. Some of these children are going to have some of the most influential lives when it comes to Nordic mythology. The 3 children are as follows. Jormungandr, the Midgard serpent. Hel, the goddess of death, or the goddess of the underworld, if you will. And Fenrir, a giant wolf. Odin feared the children that Loki and Angerboda had, angered that Loki had gone behind Sigyn's back and had these 3 children. No, Odin was afraid. Odin, earlier in his life, did something that is mildly controversial in the way I'm about to be talking about it and the way that it was interpreted. Odin hung himself from the world tree to have all-knowing power to understand what was going to happen later in the lives of the Aesir and the Vanir. And with this, he didn't see things he would like. He understood Ragnarok and how it would happen, so he stopped it before it could even start. While they were very young, he casted Jormungandr, Hel, and Fenrir out. He did not like them in his realm, so he tossed them aside. Fenrir was chained up on an island with the strongest materials in all of the 9 realms that they could find. Hel was thrown into Niflheim, and eventually she became the goddess of death in that fashion. Jormungandr was thrown into Midgard and became the Midgard serpent. He was cast into the sea. And mind you, this was when they were very young. So eventually, Fenrir grew stronger, made Odin more and more afraid. Eventually, Jormungandr got so big that he ended up just getting out of the sea. He eventually broke free. Then Hel started to have enough. She ended up supplying Fenrir with an army of the dead to lead against Asgard, causing Ragnarok. But Ragnarok is a time point. What causes it and starts it all is another point. We need to go back to their father, Loki. Now let's get back to it. My battery died, I had to change that one out. Loki, the god of mischief, had those 3 children and several others with his wives, Sigyn and Angrboda. This is where it gets interesting. Loki had some beef. Loki eventually, on the adventures of him and Thor, would cause mischief, causing a little bit more death than needed to be and a little bit more trouble than needed to be. But he also decided, I'm going to kill your brother. Balder, who, when he was born, was blessed by his mother Freya to never ever be harmed by anything in all of the 9 realms. Apparently, how the story was told is that everything in all of the 9 realms had casted allegiance with Balder and pledged to never cause Balder harm except one item. And that item Loki found out about. Loki then decided to trick Hur, Balder's brother, blind brother, to shooting Balder. Something in the stories had described a woman was needing to be impressed, and Hur decided, okay, sounds good. Eventually shooting, I say eventually too much, ending up shooting Balder with a mistletoe-tipped arrow. Balder died, and eventually Balder died and ended up causing a lot of chaos because Balder was a great defender and a great fighter, and Odin realized, this being, something that you're doing, and then, you've had these children, and eventually this causes Ragnarok, I can't believe you. After killing Balder, Loki was then tied up by the entrails of his children to a rock. And then Fenrir, Jormungandr, and Hel decided, could we ball? The Battle of Ragnarok was a death-heavy battle. Let me describe it to you. Odin attempted to fight the giant wolf Fenrir, but dies in the process. The god of vengeance, which is ironic in this situation, then proceeds to kill Fenrir. Thor and Jormungandr eventually clash. Thor does kill Jormungandr in this fight, but Jormungandr gets the last say in it due to Thor succumbing to the wounds that Jormungandr had bestowed upon him, also poisoning the giant killer, Thor. During the last of this battle, with the army of the dead, the Valkyries, and the other soldiers of Asgard, stood against the giant and the guardian of Muspelheim, Surtur. Surtur, taking his giant flaming sword and casting it upon Asgard and Midgard, burning everything in his wake and destroying the rest of the 9 realms. No one was left. Everything was destroyed. Even Surtur himself had killed himself with his sword. This eventually set way to a new beginning. There were 2 people left. There was Leif and Leifalsir, or Leifrasir? Not sure. These 2 were the 2 left after Ragnarok, and started to repopulate the world afterward. How that works genetically, not sure. But yes, Phoenix style, the world was then reborn anew after Ragnarok, which is the world that we know and love today, if this is correct. My name is David. Thank you all so much for watching. Thank you so much if you made it this far into the video. I appreciate you sitting around and letting me summarize the entirety of Norse mythology. I appreciate you, and I hope I can see you in the next one. Thank you so much for your time. Bye-bye.